So, Chevra, did you ever have the experience that you were like trying to think of something and it was sort of like hovering on the corners of your consciousness, but you couldn't quite get it. You knew it was there someplace. Like where are my keys? I know where they're. No, I mean something a little deeper than where are the keys. All right, but it's an idea that it's in formulation, but you can't quite get to it. Well, that's where I find myself this morning, and I'm going to need your help. So I've been invited to do a lecture in Sweden towards the end of November on the relationship of science and religion, and with particular reference to what we read this morning in the Torah. All right, the first chapter of Bereshit. And so there are two sort of traditional ways to handle that question. One is to try and figure out ways for the Torah, the story as it's told in the Torah, to conform to our understandings of science. Okay. So, for example, we note in the first chapter of Bereshit that there's a kind of progression that you've got like sort of fish, and then you have mammals, and then you have humans. So you could look at it and say, I see, it's a parallel to the process of evolution. Okay? Or you could look at the beginning, and the very fact that it says that in the beginning, that there is a beginning. Oh, well, that's like the Big Bang, right? And light is the first thing that gets created, so, that sort of, it all sort of fits. And that's a pretty common approach to try, that's the sort of very traditional approach, to try and say that there's actually no tension or no contradiction between the scientific perspective and the religious perspective. And what I find problematic about that is that presupposes that our scientific perspective is the measuring stick by which we will now judge the conformity of the Torah. So when it matches, when the Torah seems to match the scientific, well, that's great. And when the Torah doesn't match the scientific, well, then we have to do something metaphorical. So I'm sure, you've heard the explanation that, it says the world was created in 7 days. How do we reconcile that with, 6 days and then rest? I got it, right? I knew that. How rest counts. That's what's created on the seventh day. So, how do we reconcile that with the world being billions and billions of years old? Oh, well, who knows what a day was? You didn't have like sun and the moon and the stars until like the fourth day. So up until then, a day was whatever God wanted to call it. So I'm sure you've heard that explanation. Or we look at it simply as being metaphorical. Oh, they don't really mean a day. What they're trying to do is they're trying to divide between these different categories of things. Or we look for another explanation that seems to make some kind of justifiable sense out of what otherwise is a glaring contradiction. So I'll mention one example. I came up with this one a while back, that if you think about the contrast between the description of the creation of the universe or the history of the universe, from a scientific perspective, the universe is about, 14 billion years old, 15 billion years old. Okay? And so when you say that we just entered year 5777, all right, you're off by a factor of 3 million. Right? Okay. Yeah? It's a nice round number. Right? So you're off by a factor of about 3 million. But if you look at the first chapter of Genesis as a story of the beginnings of human consciousness, when did you first have people? People that could understand things like blessings and conquering the earth and tending the earth. All right? Well, 5777 is not even off by a factor of 2. Human civilization as we know it started maybe 10,000 years ago. So saying, the count of 5777 is, that's a statistical error compared to being off by a factor of 3 million. Right? So you could look at the first chapter of Genesis and say, oh, well, they're not really talking about like geology. they're talking about, or cosmology, they're talking about when did humans come into the picture. And it's interesting when you look at the Bible as a whole, you have exactly most of one chapter before human beings come into the picture. So that's clearly the emphasis of the Torah is on humans and the evolution, not of human biology, but of human sociology and theology. So that's one kind of relationship between the scientific and the religious, where the religious either conforms to the scientific or parallels to it, or otherwise is explained metaphorically. That's A. B is to say these are actually two different approaches altogether, and you really shouldn't be making any kind of direct comparison between them. That the scientific is to tell you how, the religious is to tell you why. All right, so science is fabulous when it comes to all kinds of explanations about how did this happen and how did that happen. But it is useless when it comes to, why, what is the purpose of this happening? That's simply not a question that science can address at all. Right? So it can tell you, for example, why there is evolution or how there is evolution. It can't tell you why there is evolution. That's where, a sort of a divine reading has to come into the picture to tell us, why we are here. So be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The biologists can tell us how you do that. Right? They can't tell us why we should do it. And that's where religion would come into the picture. So that sort of solves the problem by saying, well, really you don't have to make a comparison between them because they are, you're comparing apples and oranges. All right, but now we get to what I would like to suggest is a third approach. And this is the one I'm trying to work on. I don't completely have a handle on it yet, and that's what I need your help with. When you think about that first approach, where science is the measuring stick to which the Torah then is trying to conform, or we try and get the Torah to conform, what would it look like if we did it the other way? What it would look like if we said that is the Torah perspective that is the measuring stick. And we need science to try and conform to the measuring stick that's provided by the Torah. And what do I mean by measuring stick? What do I mean by the Torah is the measuring stick? Not, the world was created in 7 days. That's sort of trivial. But I mean things like that God repeatedly, first of all, that there is a God in the picture at all. A creative force, a conscious creative force, a conscious creative force that is creating with purpose. How would that given, that assertion, if we assume that that is true, how does that impact on what we understand in science? What does that tell us about, for example, the process of evolution? That it's not simply a random selective selection of the fittest, all right? But rather natural selection, but rather that it is purposeful, that when that evolution happens, we are headed toward the goal that that creator had set out at the beginning. What does it mean that if there's anything that the first chapter of Genesis pounds home, it's the idea that the world is good. That's how God concludes the creation of every single day. And he saw what he did, and it was good, and he saw what he did, and it was good, and he saw what he did, and it was good. And then at the end, it says, and God saw all that he did, and it was very good. How would science be impacted if it took to heart the assertion that the world is good? Not simply a predictable and well-explained pattern of neutral physical forces, but rather that there was something good in that meeting of natural neutral forces. I don't know the answer to that question, but to me it strikes me as an essential question. And the third point, all right, from a purely scientific perspective, human beings have no priority over anything else. We are a collection of molecules. Amoeba are collections of molecules. Rocks are collections of molecules. Stars are collections of molecules. What diff? And there are actually, you see one small echo of this in the whole question of speciesism. That there are people, including a guy at Princeton who's one of the leading people in the world in this, who argue that there's really no substantive value or valuative distinction between a baby and a monkey. Who says one's more important than the other? Right. Peter Singer is his name. Dramatically wrong, but I'll leave that aside. Unless you're a monkey, but they probably think that's a good idea. But the clear assertion of the Torah is that the whole process of creation, the ultimate thing, people refer to it as the pinnacle of creation, is human beings. What happens if the universe really was intended to be created so that there would be human beings? How does that impact on the world of science? Now, clearly, it would impact on the world of science from a kind of moral and ethical perspective. All right? It is a slap in the face to the accusation of speciesism. Yes, I think that human beings are more important than monkeys. If it was a question of rescuing a human being or rescuing the dog a human being I didn't know and the dog that I loved, I'm sorry, I have to rescue the human being. That's just a set of priorities that comes right out of the Torah. So certainly from an ethical point of view, that's true. But I'm wondering, and this is the big question mark for me, what is the impact, or what would be the impact on our understanding of the scientific world, where I don't question for one small second any of the discoveries of science as far as geology or biology or cosmology or anything else. I accept those absolutely as a given. Right? But if the world is good, if the world is created by a God, if the world has purpose, if the world has humans as somehow the ultimate creation, how does that transform the venture of the scientific world? What does it add to the whole venture of the scientific world? I don't have the answer to that question, and that's the question I need to have an answer for. So now it's your turn. Yeah.
Obviously, it's a huge question, but one small point is you can look at evolution and the environment as a stage where doing the right thing, the good thing, can be helpful. There's a lot of research on altruism in animals, birds, and there are articles that birds that don't mate will still help the birds in the community in order to help them be successful and grow. That's an example where you can say evolution is set up in such a way that if someone makes a good decision, it's helpful to the species. And in other cases, species become extinct because there wasn't anything positive going on.
And the Bible tells us repeatedly that sometimes people do too. Sodom and Gomorrah, where you really have the opposite of altruism. Okay, good. That's very good. All right, I'm stealing all of your ideas. So, go ahead, Gordon.
There are ultimate truths in the world, and while science are accurate in measuring the truth of what happened, the Torah and the Bible talk about the truths of how the world was created and how we should relate to our country to God, and which truth is really more important. Science is nice, but really, what is the real truth that's more important? The Torah teaches which is more important truth than the truth that science teaches. That's ethical religion.
Okay. Although I think when you're waiting for your blood test to come back, you're hoping for a lot of.
But in terms of just how we deal with each other.
How we deal with each other, yeah. Yeah, just, you are much more than a collection of molecules to me. Good. Yes, Gary?
Certainly
dimension beyond. Uh-huh. Yeah, I heard a great line. I won't quote it exactly because it's not appropriate for the shul, but somebody described Einstein and said, you know that you are one tough character when even when you're wrong, you're right. You know, because there's so much about Einstein where he thought he was wrong about something. You know, he had this idea, and they said, no, that can't be right, and he did something else. And it turned out his initial idea was right, you know, but nobody else would have thought of it. You know, so even though he rejected the idea himself, it turned out the idea was right. All right, so even when he was wrong, he was right. Okay, so maybe God is this sort of unifying step, you know, that next thing. And that certainly could apply to our consciousness. You know, we do what we do with our rational mind. We get it to do all that we can get it to do, but then sometimes we need something that seems to come from outside of our rational mind to move us up to that next level. There's a great story, I forget his name, I always forget his name. Arthur, you probably remember his name. The guy who figured out the structure of the carbon molecule, with the six-sided carbon molecule. Kekule. And he'd been working on this for years, and he couldn't nail it down. And at night, he had a dream of, I think it was 6 snakes that were each like sort of biting onto each other's tails. And then when he woke up the next morning, then he used that as the model that confirmed then that was the structure. But Kekule, okay, thank you. But you know, that's so. You know, here he was, a great scientist doing all of the scientific, rational things. The answer came to him. You know, luck favors the prepared mind. You know, it wasn't just that he had a dream. He nailed the science, and then there was that inspiration beyond his rationality. Yes, go ahead.
Isn't it true that the Torah of biblical thought was around long before scientific thought?
Of modern scientific thought, absolutely. Yeah, I mean.
Therein lies the significance of biblical thinking and belief that sometimes we just need to accept the fact that we cannot comprehend everything there is to know about the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And where you can answer certain questions, that's why you need and have to rely on biblical thought.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh. Yes. Although, let me mention just what I find a little bit problematic about that, because the implication of it is that the larger our knowledge becomes, the smaller our religion becomes. In other words, oh, well, we answered that question, we answered that question, we answered that question, and the ancients, 4,000 years ago, they didn't have any of those answers, so they just described everything to God, and we're nibbling away at God as we have our scientific understanding. All right. That makes me a little bit edgy, because I think God's a lot bigger than that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. So you're not reducing it. Uh-huh. Yeah, and we don't have to. Yeah, there's actually, if you notice the commentary on the Torah this morning, the rabbis made a big deal about how the first letter of the Torah looks like a bet. All right, where they emphasize that there's, it's closed here, and open here when the text goes that way. As if to say, you can go back this far, and then you hit a limit of what you can understand. And beyond that is a world that's beyond our understanding. Yes?
There was something in anthropology, I remember when I was back in school, about creation and having that. And if you look at the sources of creation today, what was created on each day,
Yeah.
though everything is different, every species has to go through the same process. You still have to have reproduction, and you have to have eating, you have a form of communication. And so you went through all these various things till you got to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to be going over to robotics, so we can all lie there and have them feed us. But, it's...
Peel me a grape, Beulah X. Right. Okay,
Right.
good.
There's a progression in all of us, and we're still expanding. The universe isn't finished yet, and there may be something greater than humans. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Uh-huh. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Uh-huh. Yes. Go ahead, Cheryl.
This is my personal opinion, how I look at science and the Torah. To me, the Torah is a set of religious truths, how should we behave, how we have to think about situations, how we have to treat other people, our relationship with God.
You're in the apples and oranges world.
They're apples and oranges, so it's just different kinds of things.
Mhm.
Yeah, we are finite beings, as people have brought to us many times, and we cannot understand the infinite.
Mhm.
And I don't think that science quite explains the infinite either, because, so what happened before the Big Bang? What
Right.
was there before? So we still have, that to ponder, but it doesn't matter, because the Torah is teaching us how to function
Right.
as good human beings in this world.
Right, and all of that other stuff, the Torah gets passed in less than one chapter. All the Big Bang, et cetera, and 13 billion years of geology, the Torah gets passed in a couple of paragraphs. Yes, Tasha?
I just thought that God sort of created all these, and these knowledges out there, and he's giving mankind the chance to find them.
Mm-hmm.
That he's provided it, and it's there,
Mm-hmm.
and we're finding it little by little.
So that's a very interesting thought. So instead of looking at science as this sort of independent thing to which religion would be compared one way or another, science is, in and of itself, one of the things that God, through human beings, has created. That's a pretty humbling thought. Very interesting thought. Okay. Okay. Ben, were you in there somewhere?
I guess my wife is very
Uh-huh. I'm sorry, I didn't see. Go on, then.
I was going to say that if you want to take Torah as the primary, and humans were created in God's image, humans have the power to create or to destroy just as God does.
Mm-hmm.
And science is one of the tools that they've developed to do that.
Mm.
You go back thousands of years and we had love or invented a wheel, and those were
Right.
tools, and those tools have gotten more sophisticated with science and understanding how molecules and things work, so that we can create engines and medicines and all kinds of things, but they all really just relate back to the same
Mm-hmm.
concept, that it was humans' decision to create or to destroy or to do good or to do evil.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
those are these tools.
So the science began, and if you remember 2001, the Space Odyssey, that one of the first things that happens in the movie is that a monkey learns how to use a stick as a club, and that's that process of that it can go either way, right? Very nice. Okay, I'm trying to remember all these things. I can't write anything down now. Phyllis, did you have something you wanted to say?
You can play the video back.
Oh yes. All right, technology. Thank you, science. Okay, Cantor. Time for the Chatzikat. Oh, wait, there are more. Oh, Yosef, go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Yosef.
So, I have a very big teacher of that, who I get into a lot of discussions with, and so one of them was about the effects of Judaism on mankind. And so I was saying that, there hasn't really been any, rapture yet, where, the best people, become, superhuman, or this happens, or that happens to them. And my teacher pointed out that over time, since Judaism was created, the world's moral capacity has developed amazingly along with science.
Mm-hmm.
And at least the moral capacity really started with Judaism. All the pagan religions that were up there yet didn't have that.
Right.
So,
Very nice. Yeah, so we as Jews have a special role in that human evolution, that societal evolution. Very nice. Yes. Yes, Sid.
And to add another one, so when you can either eat to live or live to eat.
Right.
You eat, you say a blessing, it elevates the fact of just eating to sustain yourself as an animal would to a higher purpose.
Mhm.
Dedicating yourself to a higher purpose.
Mhm.
So just as science and the Torah is dedicating the science, dedicating your life to a higher purpose.
Mhm.
You can't understand.
Right, well, and the important thing, the implication that there is a purpose, all right? Yeah, I'm forgetting how you define that purpose. From a raw scientific point of view, or at least a raw, trivial scientific point of view, there's no purposefulness. Things just happen in the pattern that they happen. But is it possible that science is missing a scientific truth that there is a purpose to the world? That's a really interesting idea. Thank you, guys. Ben, I'm sorry, Ben. A little peripheral vision.
Normally I would say God forbid, but it doesn't seem right. So let's say there's nuclear annihilation that wipes out all mankind.
Right.
It goes further, wipes out the planet,
Right,
destroys the planet.
Right.
So then what was the purpose? Or has God moved on and now created another planet somewhere else in the universe where he's going to try again?
You know,
And see,
that's a great question. There is a beautiful midrash that says that God tried 974 times to create the world, and it never worked, because he was always creating the world with a sense of strict justice. And the world simply could not survive the demand that everything be always right all the time. And so world after world after world was shattered. And then finally, God's attribute of mercy said, this isn't going to work. We have to work together. And that's why you have Adonai Elohim, where those two words come together, where one, Adonai represents mercy, Elohim represents justice. And that was the world that was created. And why was it 974? Because 26 generations later, you come to the giving of the Torah. All right, where once the Torah is given, then you've come to sort of like the peak of the creative process. The implication being that what we have in the Torah ought to be enough, following Yosef's idea, that if we spread this idea fast and strong enough, that we will be able to transcend that. And we move into the world of science fiction, where they divide between, when they talk about futuristic science fiction, they divide between the planets that couldn't handle nuclear weapons and the planets that could. All right, so that's, if we fail in that, then it'll be another world that God created that didn't last, right? Because there wasn't enough mercy in the world. All right? So bringing that mercy, it's a great image. Bringing that mercy into the world, that's a crucial thing for our survival. Great, thank you. And the people of Gothenburg, Sweden, thank you. Yes, Ken, go ahead. Go for it. Uh-huh. The speck, right. Right. Well, pardon me, my first thought is, although this is going to sound trivial, it sounds a little bit like Horton Hears a Who. Okay? But leaving that aside, though, I would reverse the nafkamina, like the takeaway. I would reverse from what Carl Sagan said. Yeah, we're on this, one little speck among billions and billions of planets, right? Yes, that's certainly true. And it's possible we are the only sentient beings in this entire universe. Possible. Okay? We certainly don't know of any other sentient beings. All right? So what that means is that all of those emotions, all of that, love or hate or anything else, is incredibly significant, precisely because we're on this little speck, but we are providing the only moral, what should I call it? The only moral component of an entire universe. That's an incredible thing. All right? So rather than seeing it as being insignificant, I would see it as being, pardon the expression, cosmically significant. We are the ones that make this universe a potentially moral place. We transform the nature of the universe. All right? When God says it's good, maybe we're the only ones that are making it that way in the entire universe. And going back to what Yosef said, as for us as Jews, as being a driving moral force, we are transforming the universe. That's an incredibly power. It's anything but insignificant. Although I certainly understand the understanding in the universe that we are minuscule compared to everything else that goes on. From a moral point of view, we're anything, an emotional point of view, we're anything but minuscule. All right? In a moral and emotional sense, we may be the dominant species in the entire universe. Not bad for a day's work. Oh, that's okay. No, but I can't sit up here if you're not sitting down there. Remember that. Okay, so